Hello, everybody. Welcome to Where is the Line, where we explore the gray areas of life. My name is Jane, and I am with my co-host, Sabrina. Sabrina, how are you doing?
Hi, Jane. I'm doing well. I know we have a very special guest today, but before we introduce them, I'm joined by my latest purchase here. And
Ooh.
for those of you that listened to our opener for season three, I've been talking about getting a weighted stuffed animal. So here it
hmm Okay, tell us his name. Is it a him or a her?
is. It's a him. His name is
Okay.
Bonbon,
All
Spanish for
right.
marshmallow. So yeah. Oh my gosh. Anyway, it's brand new. I don't know how I feel about him, but so far so
I
good.
listen, I'm proud of you. It was one of your was it one of your ins for the
Yeah, it was
year?
one of the ins, yeah,
Okay, see, you're
in
already checking off some
2024.
of your ins, and I am still working my way there. So very proud of you.
How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. I am starting to get back into things, going to the office. Good news is we have a very exciting topic today. It's a very sensitive and vulnerable topic, but I'm very excited to introduce our special guest. Before I introduce her, I want to kind of set the stage here. We recognize that today's topic is a very sensitive, very personal, and very vulnerable topic, which is the ups and downs of an IVF journey. We recognize that fertility is such a complex and personal journey, and everybody's journey looks very different. So, the purpose of this episode is not to act as medical professionals or to tell anybody how to approach their experience or journey, but really just to share one person's perspective and experience. And with that said, I want to introduce my friend Sarah Freese. She's a good friend who I met from work. We used to partner and support the same customers. And I have to say, Sarah is one of my favorite people to work with at work, and it's very good to always see her in the Chicago office. But I'll let Sarah introduce herself.
Thanks, Jane, and thanks, Sabrina. You're so sweet, and thank you so much for that introduction. Hi, everyone. I am Sarah Freese, and I'm based out of Chicago. And today we're going to talk about my IVF journey, our journey to our son. He's now 15 months old. So I'm going to talk about my experience. We started the process in the fall of 2020, and then we welcomed our son in October 2022. So it was a pretty long, trying process, and learned a lot about infertility, IVF, the ups and downs of it. So I'm excited to share my experience with all of our listeners today. And I do want to preface by saying that the stories and the experience that I share today are unique to me. This is how I felt going through it. This is not a reflection of how everyone in the community feels when they're going through this process. But I will say that the women that I have connected with, a lot of the feelings that I've shared do resonate. So, with that being said, although they're my experiences, you might find a lot that resonates with you, or just even learning, having friends or family members that are going through the process. I think it is helpful hearing someone else's experience of what it's like, because unless you actually walk through it, and really anything in life, it's hard to actually know what it feels like. And so I learn a lot about other people's experience by hearing their stories. So I hope today we can share with our listeners, a deeper dive into what does IVF look like, and what are the ups and downs and the roller coaster of this crazy journey.
Yeah, Sarah, first of all, thank you for being here. And we're just happy that you're and thankful that you're open to sharing the story, right? It is a very personal one. And um, it is so common, right? I think I read like 1 in 4 couples struggle with getting pregnant. And so for you to share openly about your journey, and now I have the blessing of such a beautiful child, and it's just that is beautiful, right? And maybe not everyone will get there, but just thank you again for sharing with us.
Of
So
course.
yeah, so let's start from the beginning. Can you tell us a little bit more about, like, prior to even going down the route of IVF, like what prompted you and your partner to explore that option? Like, what was some of the first things you explored? Were there other things that you tried or considered? If you could walk us through that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, for me and my partner, we had been together for almost we were together for about 8.5 years before we got engaged, and then almost 10.5 years by the time we got married. So we had been together for a long time. We had dated distance. We wanted to have a longer engagement. We really wanted to kind of enjoy that process. And by the time we then got married, I was I had just turned 33, so while it feels young when you are looking to grow a family and wanting to have more than one child, you start to kind of feel like, is this, time's not necessarily on my side. So we started to try for a family to grow our family right away, and it just wasn't working. And it used to kind of be with like with your doctors that they say, try for a year and then you can go see a fertility specialist. But a lot of more doctors are a lot more open now. And if you do get kind of pushback from your OBGYN saying try for a year, but you feel like something's wrong, I would encourage you to push back and advocate for yourself. So we were only really a few months in, and I just knew like something wasn't right. And so I ended up getting tested with my doctor, and I was diagnosed with a condition called polycystic ovarian syndrome, and essentially makes it difficult for me to conceive naturally. And that was only a few months in. So if I had waited the whole, 12 months going through this whole process, who knows how much longer it would have taken. And and through that process, given my age, knowing that we wanted to start a family, and then have like the privilege of benefits through work where we could go straight to the most aggressive option, which would be IVF. That is how we decided to get there. And I want to say that going straight to IVF is a pretty big jump. Most people will, they'll try oral medication. Some insurances won't even cover IVF until you try an IUI procedure a few times. And then most people will, if that doesn't work, will end up at IVF. But given the benefits that we have with work, and knowing that it also kind of allowed for like fertility preservation with IVF and being able to bank embryos for the future, that was our initial decision to say, hey, you know what? Let's just jump right to IVF because we can have a baby, we can bank embryos for the future. I'm getting older, and then we can kind of continue on with our life. And that's kind of how I thought about it. I'm like, hey, I got this insurance with IVF, and IVF is supposed to work. It's great. It's just going to be like this great process. Like, let's jump in, and we'll get into it. But there's a lot more that goes into it, and it's not just like this very easy thing that you just say, hey, I want to, do IVF and be done with it. So we but a lot of people don't go straight to it. There's a lot of other steps along the way. But looking back, I'm so glad that we went straight to it because our IVF journey was also very long.
Mm. Yeah, that's so interesting. Thank you for laying that out because I personally wasn't even aware that there was other options in between, like IVF, like going to the extreme, right? Going to IVF, like, and I don't think that's talked about enough. Like, what are some of these options? So until you're faced with it, right?
Right.
Um, so yeah, I'm curious also to know, like, how much did you know about IVF, before you actually explored that option? And obviously, there's the medical side, and then there's the emotional, mental side, right? So,
Yeah.
like, if you could shed light on both sides, and like, yeah, especially walk us through some of these emotions. And just for
Yeah.
context, I'm freezing my eggs actually this month, and I'm very, very much feeling nervous. So whatever you can sort of help our
Yeah,
listeners and myself to like shed light on that
for
process
sure.
and sides.
Yeah, and I just want to say kudos to you. Obviously, freezing your eggs is a big deal, and the nervousness and the anxiousness, those are all very normal emotions, and just the process of freezing your eggs is a big process. So, I mean, even kudos to you to taking that step, very brave and courageous, because there is a long process there, and whatever steps that it took you to get there, I'm sure were also kind of like ups and downs as well. So I know probably it wasn't a decision that you took lightly, but starting IVF initially, like very excited, obviously afraid and nervous. I I didn't like the things I kind of knew about it was, IVF, like you kind of think about it from like a celebrity perspective. You're like, oh, like all these celebrities, like they do IVF and it works. But then you also start to hear about it more that more quote unquote normal people do IVF. But I just kind of knew that it had the highest chance of success. I didn't know all the steps to it. What I did do as we started to, as we said, hey, we're going to do IVF, I felt very strongly in learning about the process. So there's this one website, it's called Fertility IQ, and there was a lot there that I learned, and I actually purchased some of the subscription service to be able to access their resource library about kind of like the IVF, the labs, kind of the steps along the way. What is egg freezing for those that do that? What is the medications that are used? Like, how did it work? Because for me, I just like wanted to know like what am I walking into? Although I like knew in my mind, I'm like, oh, this is gonna be like I'm excited about it. We're gonna grow our family. This is gonna work. Like, why would it not work? I still like wanted to know a little bit more about the process, and that made me feel like just more like empowered that I had this knowledge. So those were what I wasn't feeling overwhelmed at this point. I was excited. I had the information and I didn't have, like, my sister was going through this experience at the same time. So I had her to kind of bounce some things off of. And I didn't start opening up about it in the very beginning. So I was like very much kind of like in my own little bubble. And as I kind of went along this process, I started opening up a lot more. And I think the biggest thing about all of this is that I hope whoever, if whoever's listening or if just one person takes away that you're not alone in this process. And there are others who are also going through this and experiencing similar feelings. And that's what, as I started opening up and connecting with other women, that it just made me feel less alone and that there wasn't something that was wrong with me. It's just a process. You know, life happens to us. These are the cards that we're dealt with. There's highs and lows along the way. And sometimes, yeah, I mean, a lot of the times life is hard. People would say, congratulations, I'm so excited for you. Like, you're starting IVF. And I understand like that excitement. But at the same time, I was thinking, why are you congratulating me? Like, this isn't something that I want to do. Like, this is a medical diagnosis, and this is the treatment, one of the treatment options for this diagnosis. And I think along this process, along the way, there's a lot of this intent versus impact that just because you don't know about it, which is I'm hoping that we're educating our listeners, like the more that you know, the more that you maybe are able to support someone going through the process and just kind of be there. Because a lot of the times you just want someone to be there for you and to listen, and you don't want someone to solve things for you.
I never really seen it as yeah, it's a medical like procedure essentially. Like
Mhm.
it's not, I think I would imagine, this is purely me speculating. I would imagine people are like saying congratulations because they feel like you're going to start your family or you're doing,
Absolutely.
which like,
Yep.
yeah, congratulations, like when it happens, but like it's never guaranteed. It's a very difficult process. And it's, to your point, like a lot of people, that is the only option. That's more of a medical thing rather than like
Mhm.
I chose and I want to do this. It's more
Yeah.
of I have to do this.
I heard this like one analogy that IVF is like buying a very expensive lotto ticket that most people get for free.
Mm.
Because for most people in the general public, they are able to conceive conceive unassisted without medical intervention. But
Mm.
there are people like myself in this community even though I have insurance coverage, it's not free. Like there's still a cost that goes along with it, and there's still things that I'm paying for out of pocket, and something that you think that are as a woman that you should be able to do naturally because this is like what we're supposed to be able to do. And then when your body fails you, it's just like these weird emotions that you're kind of angry, upset, but they're also thankful that there are interventions in science that can make this happen. I don't know, Sabrina, how do you feel
Yeah.
about your process?
Yeah, as you were speaking, I was like nodding because I wrestled with both sides of the emotion. Sort of people come up to me and are really excited. And then I was angry at that. But then I was thinking, what reaction would I like? Like if people are like,
Yeah.
I'm so sorry, you don't have a partner and you have to make this decision. Yeah, I wouldn't want that either. And
Right.
then I felt the last one, the one that resonates most with me is the feeling of empowerment. I had a friend share who did egg freezing recently. She said, giving yourself the injections is empowering and you're taking your life in your own hands and your future. And so I'm going with that one. And
It
I'm
is.
still riding on that train. Like, hopefully that will carry me through. But I hear you. I've been mad at people and I've had all the emotions.
Sarah, you suggested that there's obviously a lot of downside and difficulties that comes with
Mhm.
IVF. It sounds like you were very excited to start, um, but you mentioned financial. We talked about physical, right? Sabrina mentioned like you have to have injections.
Yeah.
And we already started talking about a lot of the emotional side of things. Help us understand, especially for people like, let's say for me, right? I'm not very familiar, but I
Yeah.
know a lot of people go through it. I know it's
Yeah.
talked about a lot more, it's a lot more common, but I really don't know much into the details of IVF.
Yeah.
Help
Yeah.
us
So,
understand the pros and cons,
yeah.
your experience.
No, for sure. I mean, I think the easiest for like those who aren't familiar about it, I think just kind of high level, just to kind of think about like what are you actually doing in the whole process. If you think about a woman's normal menstrual cycle, one egg is released every single month, and then whether or not that egg is fertilized, then the menstrual cycle, starts or not starts, depending if the person's pregnant. So what IVF is doing is we're using a bunch of fertility injections, which is what these shots are. And we're basically supercharging the body. We're saying, hey, body, instead of producing one egg, I'm going to try to get you to produce as many eggs as possible. And some women who have diminished ovarian reserve might only get, a few eggs from that cycle. Someone like me who has polycystic ovarian syndrome, I got over 40 eggs in one of my IVF cycles. So
Wow.
that is very much like on the extreme. I'd say on average, an average IVF cycle is probably going to get you anywhere between 12 and 20 eggs because you're using those injections and those meds to basically supercharge. And then you'll have a procedure that will, they force your body then to ovulate, and then the doctor will go in and retrieve those eggs in a procedure that you have to be put under anesthesia. So Sabrina will be going through that entire process to go and to retrieve her eggs. You're being put under anesthesia. It's a twilight anesthesia. So it's a nice nap. And Sabrina, you'll have to let me know how it's like the best nap that you'll get. But still, like it's still anesthesia and you still have to go and you take the day off and it's uncomfortable afterwards. And so in Sabrina's step, when you freeze your eggs, you'll stop right there after the egg retrieval and they'll freeze those eggs. As we continued on, we will then in that process, they will, take my partner. If you don't have a partner, they'll take, if you have a sperm donor or whatever it might be, they'll then take the sperm and they will fertilize those eggs. And the thing that's so hard about IVF is that it's a numbers game and it sucks so bad because let's just use the example of, let's say I get 20 eggs. Well, not all of those eggs are mature. So then by the time, let's say you have 20, and then we say, okay, 18 eggs of those are now mature. Then you have to fertilize those eggs. Let's say now only 15 eggs been fertilized. And so there's this there's this funnel that keeps dwindling down. So now we have 15 eggs that fertilize. Well, now what has to happen is they have to grow the eggs that have been fertilized up to day 5, 6, or 7. They have to grow them to the stage called a blastocyst stage. That's when it can freeze the embryo, but it drops off. So let's say maybe you had 15 eggs fertilized, you might only end up with 5 embryos, maybe even less than that even make it to the final embryo stage to even freeze. So depending on your diagnosis, I mean, you might have to go through multiple rounds of IVF to even have enough embryos, to transfer. Obviously, it only takes one, but that instance, then you'll freeze whatever embryos make it to the blastocyst stage, and some women will decide to genetically test their embryos, because that's another way to reduce the chance of miscarriage after after you transfer the embryos, and that even makes it go down even more. So let's say you ended up with 4 embryos and then you tested them. They typically say that about 50% of your embryos will be genetically normal. So now you're left with 2 genetically normal embryos, which would be fantastic. So that gives you 2 chances to have an earthside baby. So it's a numbers game, because then they say as well, like, it could take 3 embryos on average to lead to a live birth. And so that's why you'll hear women do multiple rounds of IVF, because it depends on their diagnosis. And so it's a lot of time. It's like the appointments, they are inconvenient. They are, usually first thing in the morning. They will then call you or send you a message in the portal telling you, when to take your next injections, what's the new medication dosage, and then when to come back. And you have to then go in for these monitoring appointments, because they're going to monitor how your the follicles, or what hosts the eggs. They're going to monitor what's going on with your follicles and your blood levels, to then determine like what goes on next. So it's this incredibly time-consuming process. All of this probably happens from the start of starting injections to the egg retrieval. It's probably about 2 weeks. And so you're kind of in it. And then at that point, if you freeze your embryos, then you let your body kind of come back to more of this steady state. And then you'll do this transfer prep, and it's much less medication, but then you have to get your body ready for transfer. And there's different medications that are used for that. And then there's a process then to go back in, and then you have to transfer the embryo that you created. So, and then you just pray that it works. I went through I did an egg retrieval, went through 3 embryos of tested genetically normal embryos, which is, every single time you transfer an embryo, you have these hopes and dreams, and you think about your future baby, and then to transfer this embryo, and then you have to wait. There's this, just like in a normal natural cycle, if you ovulate, and then if the egg is to get fertilized or not fertilized, there's still a 2-week period from the time that you ovulate to the time that you find out you're pregnant or your period shows up. So it's the same thing that happens. You transfer, and then you basically wait for 9 days to have a blood test that says, hey, whether or not this work. And when it doesn't work, it's the most soul crushing thing, because it feels like all of your hopes and dreams and everything that you just put into that cycle, it's just gone. And it's what we don't hear a lot. And that's what I was not prepared for. I was not prepared for IVF to fail. I was prepared for IVF to work and to bring me a baby, because no one told me that. I mean, you read that it can fail, but no one ever talked. I didn't know people in my network that talked about their failures.
Right.
And that was probably the worst part about IVF, was all the failures that I had, because now it wasn't exciting. Now this was shitty. This was not fun. Now I have to start this whole process all over again. My first time I had more embryos, so I didn't have to do another retrieval. but still it like then it's in the mental and the emotional, like that for me became harder than the physical. I for me personally, the shots don't bother me. The like it for me, it just doesn't bother me. It's the emotional, it's the mental aspect of the whole process.
That's the reality. And I 100% agree with you. I feel like a lot of people go into this IVF process feeling very hopeful because,
Yes.
like, most of the time you hear success stories and you see, right? You literally see the success story, which is the baby that whoever, has through IVF, but you never talk about the failures. Like, it's one, a lot of people just don't want to talk about it because it's so sensitive and it's like
Yeah.
sad. It makes people sad. Two, like people are uncomfortable even hearing about it because a lot of times you're like, what do I say? What do I do? How do I comfort my friend or my family?
Erin Andrews, who's the sport reporter, I know she shared a lot about her experience, and I can't even imagine having to go like physically to a game and report, or like have these in-person commitments and then have this schedule that you are trying to go around, because at least my schedule is super flexible. Or Tara Lipinski, who is an ice skater who recently just shared her really long IVF journey and process. I think the biggest thing going through this, and like you, Jane, you mentioned like not knowing what to say, going through this whole process was one of the most humbling things. And I think I learned the most about how to approach those that are going through like really hard, shitty times, and to approach them with compassion, to approach them with this just like to listen, to acknowledgement. Because the biggest thing in this whole process is that I felt the most supported by those that listened to me, and they would say, you know what? I'm sorry, Sarah, that you're going through this. Really sucks, but you are very strong. I believe in you. Or they would send me a card or whatever it is. Like what was not helpful, and I know we'll get to this, but it's the toxic positivity. Oh, keep going. It's going to work. Just, keep a good mindset, and that positive attitude will get you through this. Or the worst is like, oh, just relax and it will happen. I
Yeah.
mean, would you tell that to someone who, was like as a cancer patient or just got in an accident, like just relax and it will fix yourself? Like, no, this is a medical diagnosis. So
Yeah.
it was just very humbling in terms of like we're all walking through our own journey, like whatever it might be. And in this instance, mine was IVF and the failures of it. But someone might be walking through, really difficult time with their family or a relationship or a medical diagnosis, that whatever it might be, or financial hardship. I mean, we all have something, and we don't have to solution solve for that person. But that
Right.
was the last thing I wanted someone to do, was like to solution solve for me. Because don't
Right.
worry, I'm trying to solution solve for myself. I don't need someone else trying to tell me what to do next, because in this time, I just like want to be sad. I just want to grieve. I want to be with my feelings. I don't want to think about like what the solution is to this, because right now this just sucks.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That's very helpful. That's so helpful. And it applies to so many things like beyond
So many
IVF, right? Like
things.
people going through any
100%.
difficulty, sometimes like they're in it. They are trying to
Yeah.
solve their own problems. It's not like
Yeah.
they're just sitting not doing anything. You as the friend or the family, sometimes you just need to be there to listen to them and just
Yeah.
support them. And
Yeah.
that's it. You don't need to do anything beyond that. That's
Yeah.
that's all they need at that time.
Or just
So,
asking them, like, what do they need in this process?
Mm-hmm.
Do you need me there? Do you just need someone to listen? Do you want someone to provide suggestions? And maybe someone does want someone to solution solve for them. But I think it's helpful if you ask that person, like, what would be helpful to them in that moment. I had a family member that would always, say to me, well, if it doesn't work, you can always adopt. And there's nothing against adoption, but it should not be the responsibility of the the infertility community to be responsible for all the adoptions in the world.
mhm,
And it almost like diminishes like the way that I also feel when you provide solution, because I'm like grieving this process that like I want to be able to carry a pregnancy. I know, and adoption itself has its own journey of ups and downs and
Right.
financial aspects, and you can't just go out and adopt a baby. There's a process for that, and there's failed adoptions, and I would say that's probably a very different emotional roller coaster, and it has its own challenges just like IVF. But those would be things that would be hurtful that people would say that also diminish what I was feeling.
You mentioned a lot about like the failure side of things, and you personally experienced that. Can you share with us like that component of your journey and story where things just weren't certain, things were uncertain, and
Yeah,
you feel like maybe you didn't want to continue the process anymore? Did you ever have
yeah,
that? Were you disappointed, frustrated, or
yeah,
feeling regret?
yeah.
Tell us more.
No, those are all great things. For me, I'm like how I cope is always needing like another, like what's the next step? What's plan B? What's plan C? And that's how when I like digest this with my therapist, we always talk about like that's like a coping mechanism for me. So when I
Mhm.
had my first failure, there's all these different kinds of testing that you can do. And IVF is very much like this puzzle piece of trying to kind of figure out like what works for you. And so for me, I was like, okay, well, this didn't work the first time. Obviously, I had a great retrieval. I have embryos that I banked, but the goal is not to, bank all these embryos. The goal is to transfer an embryo and have it become a live, healthy baby, earth side.
Mhm.
And this is like where the education and being knowledgeable at the process, I started to get really knowledgeable. I started to learn a lot about, what are some of the different things that could be impacting implantation failure. So I wasn't even like my embryo wasn't even implanting. Like we didn't even make it to first base where we potentially had, implantation and the baby started to grow.
Mm.
We just like we're striking out. So there's a variety of different tests that you can do. And I started learning about these different tests. I did, it's called an endometrial receptivity test. It tests the receptivity of the lining. I was thinking, well, maybe my timing was off on the progesterone that they give me. And so we made some changes. And, a month and a half, 2 months later, we did another transfer. And even though we didn't, there wasn't any like super big changes, like it still didn't work. And so kind of after that, I like went back and I mean, you can go down the IVF rabbit hole. There's a lot of really great information on an IVF. There's Facebook groups out there that women talk about their experience. And so that was very helpful for me to learn about what other women were doing. There's an entire Instagram community where women are sharing their story. And I
Mhm.
learned a lot about like what different options were by hearing other people's stories. And I feel like the more I heard other people's stories, the more I was more inclined to share just like those in my network. And we made some more changes, and by the time we went into our third one, we had some that's I was just like constantly always changing it up. Luckily, I had a doctor that was open to changing things up, that
Mhm.
he was open to my suggestions. I think that's another thing as well. Like, what clinic you're at, who's your doctor, are they open? Do you have that sort of relationship and contact where they will make changes based on what you're bringing to them? Or are they very much, nope, this is how I do it, and they're gonna like not make any changes?
Mhm.
During this whole process, I consulted and met with other doctors at other clinics to make sure that I felt like I was getting the best care with my doctor in my current clinic. And women in this community will, if they're having failures, they will switch doctors, they will switch clinics. That's very common. If you're not getting what you need out of your current clinic, then you should feel empowered to switch. It's a very big process because sometimes it feels like you're starting all over again.
Mhm.
But I learned that the lab's really important. It's not just, I mean, yes, you have to have a good doctor, you have to have a good protocol, you also have to have a lab. A lab is what will grow your embryos, and all of these things kind of work together. And I was learning all of this. And so I ended up staying with my doctor in my clinic because eventually we were making all of these changes. And I mentioned before, it's a numbers game. And so for some people like myself, unfortunately, it was just going to take longer and more tries
Mm-hmm.
than maybe the average person. Some people, it works on their first try, first transfer, boom, like they have their baby. Some people it's the second try, some people it's the third try. I mean, for us, it was the fourth time that it eventually worked. And I ended up doing a laparoscopic surgery to make sure that inside my uterus looked good. I mean, I did everything. I was leaving no stone unturned. I ended up seeing a reproductive immunologist. I mean, there are so many things that I can't, even if I tried to talk about it on this podcast, I would confuse everyone because there was just so much that I was looking into. And I think my husband was like, what IVF rabbit hole are you going on today? But for me, like that's how I coped, was by trying to find as much information as possible about this process, because these doctors are busy. You can't just sit down with a doctor and a nurse and like brainstorm like what you want to do. Like you need to like educate, figure out like what others are doing, bring it to your doctor, see if it will work for you. And a lot of the times it's just like trying to find the right protocol for the process that works for you. And so, we had gone through this experience, and had my retrieval in January 2021. All of 2021 we transferred three chromosomally normal embryos, and none of them stuck. Ended up, well, the third transfer, actually, it worked. Another thing we don't talk about is that, it can work, but then we actually ended up having an early loss. So we were pregnant, but then it wasn't a viable pregnancy. So then there's this whole like process of, well, you can get pregnant, but then there's also loss, and you can miscarry. That can still happen in IVF. Just because you're transferring a genetically normal embryo doesn't mean you can't have a miscarriage. So luckily for us, out of those three, we only had one loss, but there are some women that go through so much loss, and that's a whole nother part of it that also is that can be really emotionally draining. But we decided to, in January 2022, we kind of decided to like, let's start all over again. Like, let's do another retrieval, even though we still had embryos. We've only had done frozen transfers before. There is the option also to kind of go through a whole egg retrieval process and then transfer the embryo. They call it a fresh transfer because you don't actually freeze the embryo. You actually go through the retrieval process, make your embryo, and then 5 days later transfer it back into the uterus. It's typically not like the first thing. I guess if you look at statistics, they say frozen transfers have a little bit higher success rate than a fresh transfer, just because like your body's kind of still recovering from the egg retrieval process. But for us, it's what worked for us. We went through this whole retrieval and we did a fresh transfer, and it's the fresh transfer that actually brought us our son. And through that process, I think it was just like trying different things, but I think it goes to like being able to advocate for yourself, talk to your doctor. What are some of the things that you want to try? Like my doctor was super receptive to trying different things, and it was actually my partner's idea to try a fresh transfer, and my doctor was like, yeah, like why not? We can try it. And I think that's the biggest thing. And like being involved in your care, I think is very important. It's hard to be involved in your care if you don't know what you're talking about, which is why I was like, let me get as knowledgeable as I can about this process, because I need to know like what I'm dealing with. And if I can talk knowledgeably to my doctor, I just feel like we're on more of the same like playing field versus him just like telling me like what we're doing.
It sounds like in this situation, it benefited you because now you know your options more in depth. You were able to speak to your doctor about it more effectively, and you're able to like come in with recommendations for your own journey and in a way take control of the process. I guess to go back to that same question though, did you ever have at any point in this process want to stop or have any sort of regret?
I don't have any regret. I I started to get scared after the third failed transfer, thinking, like, can I not carry a pregnancy? Like, is there something that is like wrong with my anatomy that makes this not possible? And then my mind starts going in a gazillion directions. Am I going to have to explore a gestational carrier? And there's nothing wrong with the gestational carrier. I just like I wasn't mentally there yet. And I feel like that's another grieving process as well, because you still need to grieve, just like I kind of grieve the process of not being able to conceive like without assistance. Then I would have to grieve this whole other process of not being able to carry a pregnancy. There are some women that will go through this process and they will realize that they can't use their own eggs, that they have to use donor eggs. They're grieving the process of not having a baby that is biologically like part of them, maybe part of their partner, but not part of them. And same thing with donor sperm, what it might be. Like, I think you still have to kind of go through this grieving process, but I feel like I was like ready to keep going. I think my partner was, I think we were both getting scared. Like, hey, like, why isn't this working? Because again, like, I like stats, I like the statistics, but I also don't like the statistics. And my therapist also said, like, statistics are great if you fall within the stat, but when you fall on the other side, then it's not so great. And so, like,
Right.
statistically speaking, like after 3 transfers, this is what they say, 3 transfers of genetically normal embryos, you have a 95% chance of having a baby. So the fact that I fell within the 5%, I mean, that's so scary. Like, why am I in the 5%? Like, why isn't this working? But there was no reason like, we couldn't find a reason that like, why would I not be able to carry a pregnancy? Like, there wasn't anything that was like very obvious. You know, I met women in the community who had done 8 transfers to get their baby, 9 transfers.
Wow.
I honestly feel like if I constantly was changing stuff up, I would continue to go. And I probably at that point, well, I probably would have switched clinics, would have switched doctors. And sometimes that's all it takes is a fresh set of eyes. I still had hope and I really truly believed that it was going to work. I just didn't know when. And that's like the most frustrating thing, I think, that your efforts does not equal your results, because you can have everything perfect. You can, have the perfect cycle and you can have the perfect everything and the eggs and the lining and whatever it is. Everything can be all perfect and the labs look perfect and it still might not work. Like, while there's a lot of science that goes into this whole process, there's a whole lot of miracle. So I hold on to the miracle of life, and that, yes, this is very scientific and it's very cool that we can create a baby and like the embryo outside of the body and then put it back in. There's still a whole lot of things. If you look like what happens to happen during like a pregnancy, it's like wild. And I just like hold on to that hope and miracle that, yes, this is science, but there's just so much of a miracle.
Oh gosh, Sarah. So yes, I do also agree. Like science is wild, and I'm thankful that there is the technology out there. But I just want to say that I'm just so blown away by your strength and your perseverance and persistence. Because I don't know, I would have probably given up, or a lot of people. So you're just such an inspiration for so many,
Well,
and
thank you.
I would hope that there's listeners out there who take that right and don't give up, because it did turn into such a blessing for you. But wow, you really went through everything
Yeah.
and back.
It was
That's
worth it. I mean, now that he's here, I mean, we look back and we're like, yeah, it was such the journey. I mean, it truly was. It feels like you're at war. It feels like you're at like a battle every single day. And I, I think like some of the hardest thing is that you're still going through your everyday life while all of this is still going on.
right.
And I think you have to set boundaries. I learned a lot through that first failed cycle. Going forward, I made sure whenever I had the results of the pregnancy test that I didn't schedule anything that day or the next day. Because I was like, if I get bad news, there's no way I can work the rest. I had to go on a call after I got that first news of the failed transfer and the negative pregnancy test. I had to go on a call and it was horrible. And then it makes me think about, when we show up to meetings in person or virtual, like what is the other, like we don't know what everyone's walking through. I
Right.
mean, we have no idea. I mean, I've heard women's stories that someone finds out they're having a miscarriage and then they have to go on a work call and they're putting on this happy face.
Yeah.
It
It just
just
puts everything into
puts
perspective.
everything into perspective
Yeah.
and like treat everyone. I'm all about like treat everyone like with love and kindness and grace, and you just don't know what they're walking through. And if I can just be
Mhm.
like a light to others that I interact with and just brighten their day in some way, I feel like people just came out of the woodworks. As I told more people, they're like, I have a friend who went through this. I went through a friend, and I was connected with other people, and I just kind of like built my own little community of IVF warriors. We named our son Wyatt. So Wyatt actually means brave at war, and
Mm.
it
Mm.
was uh it was a battle to him. So we felt like that was it was such a battle to him, and it just like felt like such a fitting name. We wanted a name
Yeah.
that like represented our journey.
I know you touched on sort of some of the less favorable reactions from family and friends and
Yeah,
some of the things that they were saying. But I want to double down a little bit on as you were going through more of like a negative cycle, like the feelings of potential like anger and jealousy. Like we read that that's very common as
yeah.
comparison is the devil, right? Like were you feeling those things when things were not going as
Oh my
smoothly?
gosh.
Seeing other moms, like how was that for you?
Oh my gosh. It's so hard. And I still find myself to this day being like, while I have our miracle baby here, I'd still, I feel like it's more triggering when, like, not in a bad way, it's just triggering when I find out, someone might be pregnant and, maybe they just recently got married or whatever it might be, or they just, tried on the first time and it happened. Like those, that's still triggering to me. I don't know why. Maybe it's just because of the whole process, but yeah, there is a lot of like it's like these things of like happy for you, sad for me. Like that's
Yeah.
how it is. Like I'm happy for you, but I had to distance myself, and I think it's okay to like set those boundaries where you are. I had to distance myself. My sister, she had a baby during this whole process when I was, having failures. And I told my mom that I will be there for the baby shower, but I cannot plan it. I can't be part of it. I will be there to support my sister, but I just please like don't include me in the planning. The one thing that I think that I really appreciate is that I have had people in my network that have gotten pregnant, and they'll like send me a text or kind of give me a heads up before they kind of like announce it to like the social media world. I
Mm.
try to like social media is so great, but I had to like limit the amount of time that I spent on it. Like I said, I would go down like the IVF rabbit hole. There'd be a lot of great information. At the same time though, then you kind of come across the announcements. I think the holidays are very hard for those that are walking
Mm.
through this journey. Back to school pictures, anywhere where there's like this big congregation of like kids and pictures and being all over social media can be really hard. But just try to kind of like set the boundaries and know that like there's someone else's journey and where they're at is no reflection on where I like where I'm at.
It's totally okay to have conflicting feelings about
Yeah.
something because I think a lot of times we feel guilty if we feel jealousy towards a family or friend getting pregnant, or if we, whatever the situation is,
Yeah.
when you feel a negative feeling, you then feel guilty. But I think it's totally normal and justified to have a negative or like a triggering reaction. But at the same time, you're happy for your friend. Like you're genuinely happy.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you're frustrated for yourself or you're, upset for yourself. And I just hope our
Totally
listeners
normal.
can feel that and know that that's completely okay.
Yeah. I think that's a very powerful message for all of our listeners, right? Like, no matter what situation you're in, but just setting that boundary with yourself on how much social media intake is good for you. Like you said, social media can be so beneficial, so many reasons, but so many times I see myself just being sad when I scroll through pictures. Oh, this couple got engaged and they did this and that. And so, yeah, that's just a really good reminder. So, Sarah, pivoting, obviously you were the primary person in this journey, right? But there's also your partner. So, would love for you to share a little bit
Yeah,
more around sort of like their feelings in number
yeah,
one, the beginning, then also during the journey, and then how this has impacted your relationship overall.
yeah. So what we learned about like going through this together, and my partner and I, we had done distance for 3.5 years before we were together in the same city. So we've always been like big on communication. And that was something that we've always been really good at. I feel like we had a lot of the same feelings in the beginning. We were excited, we were hopeful. And then, my partner was just like fantastic. And I know not everyone has this ability, but he came to every single, like, not inside the building because we kind of started in this COVID era, 2020, 2021, but he would drive me to every single monitoring appointment. He would like be at every single, procedure, like outside in the car waiting for me. And so for him, he felt like that was the way that he could be a part of this process with me, was by going to every single appointment with me. And it was a lot, but we also like made it fun. We would get coffee afterwards. We would, we would document it. We would take pictures. Like we made this like whole thing. And for him, that was how he felt that he could support me in the process. And I'm like so thankful for that. Kind of like as we kind of went through the process and we had more failures, like him and I coped differently. For me, I need to talk about it. I need to repeat myself 20 times. I need to vent. I need to do that. And he is very much not that type of person where he wants to talk about it all the time. And so like that was very difficult for me, where we're kind of like we like bashed, like we clashed a lot. And so what we ended up doing is we said, okay, can we kind of set boundaries? We said, okay, no, he would be like, okay, in 20 minutes, we can talk about this as much as you want, versus me just kind of like bombarding and being like, I don't know what we're going to do next. And I talked to this doctor and I'm thinking we have to do this protocol. I just couldn't like bombard him with my thoughts 24/7. So I kind of had to be respectful of that as well. Like he'll talk about it with me, but I also need to say, hey, like, when can we talk about this? And he was just like really great and being like, hey, like, if we're going to continue on this journey, like, you need to be fully in it. And so that's kind of how we would like support each other. And he kind of like bring me back to reality. And, he was the one who kind of sat there with my doctor and asked about this fresh transfer. So he was like very much like involved in the process. And for me, like, that's like what helped.
I know we're starting to come to the end of the episode. Sarah, for anybody who is going through this process, whether it's some of our female audience or any of the couples that are going through it together, what are some tips that you can share with them to get through the experience?
So what helped for me, so what I kind of mentioned before, like educating yourself as much as possible, because I feel like I can be it's just a lot more knowledgeable. I can ask better questions. I would recommend that. I would recommend kind of throwing all expectations like out the door, because you just like never really know. A lot of the process is like hurry up and wait. It's a lot of, you just like, your body's going to do what your body's going to do, and just like not getting, it's hard not to get frustrated, but at the same time, just, I don't know, have as much fun with it as you can. Like, you're in this like shitty situation, I'm going to say. And so for us, we just try to find different ways to make it fun. There are like so many fun, like the pineapple is a symbol in the infertility community. So I got pineapple socks and I got a pineapple blanket,
Oh,
and I made a letter board, and I like would be like stims day one, and we would document the journey and take videos and pictures. I'm like, okay, we're gonna make this as fun as possible because this is a really crappy journey. If you're thinking about how to support someone going through this as well, you can always, there's so many fun things on Etsy that you can just type in like IVF's like support gift. Remember, you're strong, and your journey will unfold in the most beautiful way, whatever it looks like for you, it will, like, you will always, I'm like a firm believer, you will always end up right where you're supposed to be at whatever time that is, and just kind of trust the process.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much. You should be a motivational
Oh my
speaker.
goodness, you are so funny.
Oh,
Oh, I feel so
thank
at
you.
peace
Thank
right
you.
now.
You are so
Seriously.
funny. I just
Oh,
learned a lot about the process, and I hope that I can feel one less person feel less alone, because
Mhm.
that's like what gave me hope and inspiration, was just knowing that I wasn't alone. And really that's just in life in general, right? I feel like we're all human, whatever that experience it might be, but I feel like just by being vulnerable and being open, whatever that looks like for you, it's how we kind of, connect and share our stories with each other. And for me, this is just like the journey that we walk through. And I mean, we just love our son so much, and we would do it all over again. I mean, I feel like everyone says that, but we truly would do it all over again. To if it, it led us to him. So we're ever so thankful and blessed.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for being so vulnerable today, sharing all this detail about your journey. And it's just incredible because I feel like you're really helping shed light on not only the exciting and hopeful and empowering side of IVF, but also the difficulty that one may experience when going through this, and not only the physical component of it, but also like heavily the emotional component of going through IVF. So thank you so much. And this is your opportunity to plug anything. Are you working on anything? If people want to reach out, how would they reach out to you? Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, if you want, I mean, I think probably the easiest way to reach out to me, I mean, I work at LinkedIn, so sending me a message on LinkedIn, I'm under Sarah Freese, so I've had other people connect with me there and ask me any questions. And I'm not working on anything at the moment, but it's been fun connecting with those that are like currently in the process, or friends of my network, or even coworkers that, are recently pregnant or just gave birth from, the IVF process. So for me, I love being like a cheerleader and supporter to those that are, walking through this or just need to bounce ideas off of, because so many people were there to help me through the process. So feel free to reach out, ask me any questions. I am always here to connect, and especially, us IVF warriors have to stick together.
that's right.
Thank you. Thank you for offering your time. And of course, we always want to hear from our listeners as well. Let us know, are you thinking about IVF journey? Was this episode not help you when it comes to getting to know more about the IVF journey? Have you gone through it? What was your experience? We always want to hear from you. You can email us at where'stheline@gmail.com. And remember to subscribe wherever you're listening to us. We are on Apple, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Thank you. We'll see you in the next episode.